Hey everyone, welcome to our module on PBSP implementation, specifically around how to take data for our positive behavior support plans. This has been 2 years in the making for us to finally get this module out there, so we're really excited to share this version 1 with you, and hopefully it kind of starts lots of conversations for people about how to improve this process. So we're really looking forward to sharing all of this work with you. So I am one of 2 behavior consultants here in the county. My name is Stacy Hopkins Schrump, and I'll let my partner introduce herself.
Hi, and I'm Stephanie Dye, the other special education behavior consultant here at the MAISD as well. And we're excited to talk to you about PBSP implementation and the data.
So we have to start off by saying, I mean, you've seen us before. We train functional behavior assessment and positive behavior support plans. And this is not a standalone module. This really is supplemental to that 1 day training that we do around FBAs and PBSPs. So if you've not had that training and you are watching this video, a lot of the terminology that we use in here may not sound familiar to you. So we just wanted to put that disclaimer out there and to let you know that we offer those trainings pretty regularly. We also offer that training in district. So again, this is just a supplemental if you've had that training already. We just felt like we weren't able to cover all of this material in that 1 day training. And we felt that it was a need, so we really wanted to make this module available for those who've taken the training to really be able to support the PBSP data collection. So a lot of what we're talking about today is best practice, not only from trainings that we've been to, but also just from our work with all of you around the county. We've gotten a lot of your input. A lot of the school social workers have helped us with this process. So thank you to all of them. And so it's really based on our experiences with all of you and working with you throughout the county, but also what we're talking about is also evidence-based practice. So it's not kind of what we think is best. It's what the best is out there that we really want to share with you. We realize that we make it sound really easy when we talk about these things, and not everyone has the capacity to do this exactly the way we describe it as far as best practice. And that's why this is a team-based approach so that you as teams can figure out what your priorities are. We are just here to give you the general version, and you need to take it and make it work for you. We do know it's a lot, but we want to present it to you how it should be done in best practice, and then have you be able to make those adjustments. We do a lot of these plans with all of you throughout the county, and we are going to try and generalize this process, but the struggle has been, as we all know, this is a very individualized process because we are looking at individualized student behavior. So please also keep that in mind as we go through the guidance documents that we have developed as part of this training. So when you signed up for the training, a participant guide should have been shared with you. And we just kind of want to show you what's in that so you can reference that throughout this training, because we will be referencing it in this training. So you'll see those guidance documents. Those are the different documents we will be talking through today. So you may want to pull those up. We'll show you each document as we go through each section. And then we'll be doing an activity, and you'll see where those documents are in there. So you'll want to have those available. If you want to stop and at least print out the blank data tool for the PBSP activity, you will need that probably printed out. The redacted PBSP you can just read. That's probably the only thing you really need to print. There's some video examples in there. Now, those are also kind of embedded as we go through today. But if you just wanted to watch either one of those separately after you've gone through this today, you can go back and watch one or the other of those. We really are focusing on 2 different types of data collection today, progress monitoring and then fidelity. So the rest are based on some of the examples that we're going to be showing you, and then the Google form to complete so you can get your sketches. So that is your participant guide. There's lots in it, so we will be referencing those when we get to the certain slides that have them in it. So here we are in this process. If you are into flow charts like we are, this next slide is what we share in our FBA PBSP training. We train numbers 1, 2, 3 really, really well. We're really looking at numbers 4 and 5 today. And you'll see that circle, that oval, where it says you must adapt the PBSP and implementation as needed based on ongoing monitoring. But if we're going to say a plan is or is not successful, that's our progress monitoring data. We really need to look at our fidelity of implementation. So that's going to be our focus for the rest of the module today. And again, if none of that looks familiar, that all comes from our training. So some of this is being pulled from that training, assuming you've already had it. So the next slide just shows you where we're at in MIPSI. This is the point in the behavior plan where people are usually tired and the ideas are running thin. But there are two separate boxes in here for a reason. Again, one is how are you going to take fidelity data? And Steph's going to train actually what that is. And then how are you going to take progress monitoring data? It's purposely in two separate boxes. So you do two different types of data collection. But we are going to show you a tool that captures both in the same tool. So that's just kind of where you are in your behavior plan in MIPSI. And we just wanted to point out that there's two separate sections. So two sets of data. And I'm going to let Steph take over from here, and she's going to talk about a timeline that we've developed over our work actually with all of you.
Yes. So as Stacy said, we've been working on this for a while, and this timeline that we have created have really been the whole piece of what we've been creating these last couple years of what looks the best. And again, this is best practice, like Stacy said. So we're looking at this timeline as kind of being our foundation, and all of the other guidance documents and things that we'll be talking about all go into this timeline. So the first part of our timeline, and you can pull it up if you want to look at it. So we do have that handout that has the timeline on it. And so you can follow along if you need to. And it's more in depth of helping you look through each one of these steps. But we're going to continue to reference these different steps and what needs to happen throughout the rest of this training as well. So for this timeline, we're going to look at step one. So step one is the initial implementation checklist. And this is to the point where you guys have sat down and come together as a team, written the PBSP, and you're on your first draft of it. So again, like Stacy said, we're to the point where everyone's kind of tired. They've done a lot of thinking, putting different interventions in place, talking through what the students' needs are based on the students' functional behavior assessment. And now it's how do we what do we do moving forward? How do we know that this intervention or this plan is going to help support the student's behavior? So the first thing we're going to do in step one is we're going to look at our data tracking tool. So you're going to create a tool. And luckily, Stacy and I have created a example tool that you can use if you would like, and that we're going to train through that today as well. But you're going to create your tool. Once the tool has been created and that's based off of your positive behavior support plan and the interventions in it, you're going to have to figure out who's going to take the data, both the fidelity and progress monitoring data. Who's taking the data? Who's going to analyze the data? And who's going to train everyone on how to take it? I think that's the key piece is training. How are we training all the components and all the people that will be taking it? Now that might look different if you're in a secondary building and if you're in an elementary building. Secondary, we know in middle school and high school, some kids have 6 teachers. So we might be looking at who's going to train all 6 of those teachers in collecting that data in that data form and how we're going to do it. Same thing as if there's paras or specials teachers or anybody else along the line that's going to be collecting that data, both the progress monitoring and the fidelity, who's going to train them? So don't worry though, we're going to teach you today a little bit of how to train on collecting that data and give you an activity of doing that to be able to learn how to do that as well. In the action plan for step one, we are going to look at, this is where we schedule some dates to follow our timeline. So you're going to schedule a date for a 2 to 3 day check-in. We're going to schedule a date for our 2 to 3 week check-in, and then we're going to schedule a date for our formal PBSP review, which is usually every 4 to 6 weeks. Probably in the beginning, though, when you're first implementing a plan, it should probably be that 4 weeks to really have that time down to be able to analyze that data and to look at it to make decisions. The key here in the action plan is to really make sure you have those dates scheduled because that's going to allow you to know what your timeline is and keeping people to come together and to really be able to focus on the interventions for that student. So step 2 is that brief initial team check-in. This is after 2 to 3 days of implementation. You're going to check in as a team. This might be a 15-minute check-in and really seeing, are we getting the data that we need? Are we actually implementing the plan with fidelity? Are we doing, which means, are we doing the interventions that we said we're going to do? Um, so really coming together to say what are, or are there some barriers to implementation and what those are? So really looking at, do we need to change the data collection tool? Is there some barriers in actually collecting the data? What does that look like? Do we need to do more training? So that's just that quick 2 to 3 day check-in because we don't want to go so long of collecting data and doing it the wrong way or doing it a way that we didn't have the right training and not sure what we're doing, and then coming together and being like the data doesn't show us anything, and that can be really frustrating as a team. So doing that 2 to 3 day check-in. And then step 3 is that pre-review of the PBSP. So this is kind of that 2 to 3 week time frame. We're going to take the data that we have so far and analyze some of it and kind of really look at what are some of the patterns. Are we seeing the fidelity that we want to see? Are we seeing, do we have the progress monitoring data? Are staff understanding how to take the data? Or even, are we even taking data? Did we do it for the first couple days and now we've already forgot? So it's kind of that accountability piece and really helping each other communicate and talk through. As you can tell, this whole process is definitely a team process. This is not just one person doing it. You have to come together as a team to be able to make sure that all of the pieces and parts are being put together and helping each other with that. At that step 4, this is where we have that PBSP review. So we're doing our formal 4 to 6 week implementation. So all of the data must be analyzed. And the data needs to be analyzed prior to the meeting. That's going to make the meeting go smoother. You're able to use that time to truly make decisions based on the data instead of using that time analyzing the data and not having enough time to make decisions and talk through some of those things. The key piece here is really looking at using the components of meeting mechanics. So when we get to that PBSP review and have the team around, we're going to talk through and start with what is going well. What are the students' strengths? What's going well with the plan? What's going well with the student? And then we're going to look at what are our concerns. What are some of the concerns? It could be concerns on implementation. It can be concerns that we're seeing in regards to the student's behavior, concerns about contextual fit of the plan. So coming together and looking at those concerns. We're also then, you're going to look at the progress monitoring data. You're going to look at the analyzed data to see what it's telling you. What picture is it painting for you and helping you really see, are we making progress? Are we not making progress? And then why? Helping make those decisions. The next piece, then you're going to use brainstorming. So we have to look at brainstorming different ideas based on our data. So these aren't just off the wall things. We are truly brainstorming based on what the concerns are, what our data is saying, and looking at different ideas. So again, when we look at it, the another beautiful piece about data is, are our concerns that we're stating, are those the same concerns that we're seeing in our data? Because sometimes we have concerns that this behavior is happening all way more than it should be, or it's increased, or this is going really well, or this isn't going really well. But is our data aligning with what our story is? And that is going to allow us to make better decisions as well. So based on our brainstorming, we're going to look at changing interventions, updating interventions, or continuing doing what we need to do based on our data decisions. And then at that point, we're going to create our action plan. Who's going to do what? Putting people's names next to it. When is it going to be due by? And what are some of the changes that we're going to do? And then you're going to fill out the PBSP fidelity section on the PBSP review. And we're going to explain to you how to do that as well. So when we're truly implementing a PBSP for the first time, this timeline is what is best practice. We've seen it time and time again of being able to come together and look through these bullet points and take these steps into consideration. It helps not only with looking at the progress monitoring of the students' behavior, but also helps us look at the fidelity and are we implementing these different things. So I keep saying progress monitoring and fidelity, but what do those two things really mean? We're going to move on and talk through fidelity data first. So again, we have another data sheet or a guidance document. A guidance document that's called Collecting PBSP Data. So if you open that up, you can see what that looks like as well. And I have that here too. So this is the form we're looking at. It's collecting PBSP data. And it's really the definitions and the purpose and the process between what fidelity data is and what progress monitoring data is and how they overlap as well and coming together. So those are the 2 points that we're going to be looking at today. It gives you definitions of different types of strategies that would be in fidelity. Again, if a lot of this information or language seems pretty new to you or you're not sure what it is, you want to go back to our full day FBA PBSP training because that's going to have that information in there for you. You'll be training that. So fidelity data. What is fidelity data? Well, so fidelity data is exactly what the staff does. So that's what we're focusing on. Are the staff doing what they're said they're going to do based on the interventions in the plan? And it ensures that the plan is being implemented the way that the staff want it to be implemented or the way that it's written to really help with the student behavior. So when we look at this, and this is actually the piece that comes right out of the PBSP in MIPSI is putting it in that section, right? This includes who will do what, when, and how often. This is why it's so important to make sure that we are coming together as a team to talk through some of these things and be able to have discussions about what's going well and not going well. So when we're thinking about fidelity, here's some guiding questions on there. So to break it up into different sections of the PBSP is the different strategies. So our antecedent strategies, am I prompting to the replacement behavior? Teaching strategies, did I actually teach the replacement behavior or teach the strategies that I said I was going to? Reinforcement, did I let them engage in the replacement behavior when they requested it? Did I reward the goal behavior? So the students doing what I want them to be doing or what they should be doing, did I reward that? Did I acknowledge that? And then the redirect minimize strategy. Did I respond to the target behavior using the interventions that we said? Did I redirect to the replacement behavior and really focus in on that? So these are some of the questions that we ask ourselves as staff to look at fidelity. Did I do these things? And then it's tracking that I did or didn't do those. And how are those working out? So that's the big key piece on fidelity. Again, if you look at the collecting PBSP data guidance document, which is evidence-based, so the fidelity and the progress monitoring pieces of this are evidence-based practice. And so we're looking at, again, it has definitions on each one of those and what those training pieces are. And those can be really helpful when you're helping train other staff on how to collect that fidelity data as well. So once we understand fidelity and understanding that there could be some overlap with these 2 points, next is progress monitoring data. So again, we're still in the step 1 of our timeline, and we're looking at what is the student doing, right? So we want to monitor how the student is responding and to our interventions because we want to know, is this behavior getting better, worse, staying the same based on the interventions that we have put in place. So the progress monitoring is what the student does, the student behavior, the student response. We want to really make sure we're collecting data to measure if the interventions are working to change the behavior or not. Again, when we're looking at this, there are some non-negotiable data points that we have to put in place. And those data points that we have to be taking data on are the target behavior, which is the behavior that we want to change, our replacement behavior, which is the behavior that we're teaching them to do instead, And then also our goal behavior. Like how often is the student engaging in the goal behavior that we want them to? So those are our non-negotiables that have to be data collected on in order to look at progress monitoring. Now, all of these data points are important and should be also in the plan. But when you're looking at that, we talk about some of the frequency data, especially if you look at on this form for collecting PBSP data. We're going to look at how often the data is going to be collected. Is it how many times per day, per week, all the different components with it. We do want to make sure when we're taking progress monitoring data that we are taking it the same way that we took our baseline data in our FBA. The purpose of that is that we have to be able to connect those, right? So we're taking the certain data from our baseline in the functional behavior assessment. We want to be able to compare that to our data of progress monitoring to say, is the behavior getting better? Is it getting worse? And that's how we're able to make decisions. So if we're using frequency data for our FBA, we should be using frequency data also for our PBSP implementation progress monitoring. Um, student response is also part of progress monitoring. So what that means is we want to gauge, yep, we put together this awesome intervention. We implemented it with fidelity. What was the student's response to that intervention? Did the behavior continue? Did the behavior stop? Did the student engage in the intervention? Those are different things that we're looking at in regards to what was their response. And that's all part of progress monitoring. We also have some great guiding questions here to help you when you're talking with the team and talking to ask yourself, like, are they earning their reinforcement? So sometimes what's happening is students are engaging in goal behavior and we forget to even acknowledge that because that's what they're supposed to be doing. But we have to acknowledge what their goal behavior is based on what their intervention is and based on what their PBSP says. How often is it happening? So really using these guiding questions to help us along those lines as well. Sometimes, though, when we look at target behavior and looking at collecting that, sometimes we do have other ways and other places that we have documented that target behavior. So a lot of people use Swiss, right? Or a type of behavior referral system or Power School. And so you can get frequency of the target behavior through those other avenues. However, you need to make sure that the definitions are the same. Remember, when we train functional behavior assessments, we talk about having the behavior observable and measurable. Does the definition of the target behavior for the student match what the definition is for the behaviors in Swiss? Do they correlate? Because if they don't, then we need to make sure we're taking target behavior data a different way. So we could be looking at frequency. Or maybe the policy of your school is, well, we only Swiss physical aggression, but the student has two target behaviors of refusal and physical aggression. So the physical aggression might be in Swiss, but the refusal might not be. So we need to be taking data on that. So it's not saying that you need to go above and beyond or recreate the wheel of something that's already implemented in your school or your district. However, we need to make sure it's still giving us the right information that we have. And part of that, it's got to be the same way it's described too. So as we're looking through progress monitoring and talking through all of those pieces, I really want you to make sure that you're looking at the guidance documents. The guidance documents have a lot of information in them. They're going to help answer some of your questions as well. But they're really going to help you guide through what you're looking for and making sure that you're collecting the correct type of data. So now we have a little activity so you can practice looking at how to take the information from a PBSP and put it into a data collection tool to be able to help you look at collecting progress monitoring and fidelity.
So, as Steph went over in the implementation plan, one of the things you should end up with at that initial meeting as part of that initial implementation checklist is the actual data collection form. I mean, that is the basis for your successful data collection. And if you have taken the training, as we keep referencing, there are critical components that should be in a behavior plan. So we didn't just, again, make this up. We took the evidence-based practice of writing a behavior plan and we took those critical components that must be in a plan. If we're talking about fidelity, we have to have those components in the plan to even start with before we even think about taking data. So we're to that point now where we need to make sure that we can take those critical components from that behavior plan and put it into a data collection tool, that works for the whole team, that allows us to see the fidelity and progress monitoring data and how it directly relates to those critical components of the behavior plan. So antecedent strategies, teaching strategies, redirect minimize strategies, replacement behavior, teaching all of those things. All of those things that are in this tool, that we can show you if you advance the slide stuff, like we'll be able to look at the tool just to see. And again, if it doesn't look as familiar to you, like some of these titles of these different sections, like you could set this up differently if you're more of a vertical person instead of horizontal. Like you can switch those things around, but it must include these critical components. So we even have in here, list all of the antecedent strategies in separate rows. You should always have some sort of prompt or script around the replacement behavior. Scripting is essential for fidelity. So we have the places in there where those scripts are almost required. It doesn't mean you can't add them into different areas as well. And while this sounds like a lot of front loading and a lot of work, it directly relates to whether or not you are implementing what you said would be the most beneficial for this child based on the function of their behavior. So that's where this tool comes from. So you can change it to look prettier, make it a Google form, whatever it is you want to do, but it still has to have these components to match what's in the behavior plan. So we're going to have you do an activity right now. And whether you're by yourself or whether you are with a team of people, what we want you to do in that participant guide, there's that section around the activities. So there is that blank tool, which hopefully you were able to print out. I mean, if you weren't able to, you could probably kind of follow along, which is what we just showed you. But you will also need to be looking at the redacted behavior plan. So we took a behavior plan that had all the critical components, no judging the behavior. We just tried to pick a plan that no plans are simple, but the ones that didn't have an overabundance of strategies. Because remember, the more strategies you have, the more you're monitoring. Now, some children require more, but remember, throwing everything in the, but the kitchen sink into these strategies, you really need to put thought behind them because you do need to be able to monitor them. So what we'd like you to do is take that redacted PBSP. And it might seem like, well, duh, I know how to copy from one form to the next, but it really is to kind of get that muscle memory going. We want you to be able to look at that behavior plan and transfer the interventions from that behavior plan and even create some scripts around some of those interventions into this tool. So for example, like one of the strategies is a check-in. Okay, how are you going to measure that? What are you going to do about that? There's an escort. How are you going to measure that? Where is that going to go in your plan? I mean, it's under the specific section, so you just then need to take it from the plan and put it into that tool just to see what it feels like to do that. And then we also want you to think through, and this might be the scarier part of this whole thing, is really thinking about how you would train staff to take this data. If you're kind of sitting there in a group of people, have that conversation. Maybe is there someone there who is stronger in this process? And there usually is on a team someone who is stronger in this area to be able to help train it. But we really need to develop a team capacity around data collection so that anyone could explain what this process is and kind of what it looks like. So really thinking about how do we build our capacity around taking data. And then if you're sitting there all alone, just kind of think back to the training that you've had and maybe highlight the sections and, make notes for how you would train staff, even if it's only in one or two sections. Of that tool, and maybe you come up with more questions than answers, but then you can go back to your actual team and kind of process through the next time you have to write a plan around a student. You'll know actually what questions that you need to ask. So right now we just want you to take a good 10 or 15 minutes around this activity, especially if you're with a team, to talk through this process and what this might look like if you're sitting there at that initial meeting, you're on step one of the implementation plan, like what might this look like? Because this is what you're going to walk away with to take data on. So at this point, we're going to ask you to go ahead and pause the video and engage in this activity. And when you come back, we're going to preface some things and then get into some videos of what this actually looks like as far as data collection. Okay, so welcome back. We just want to make sure that you have those tools. We didn't want you to cheat, but there is a completed tool in there based on this redacted plan. We kind of hid it in there, but there is a completed one if you would like to take what you came up with either on your own or as a team and kind of compare it to the one that we did based on that same redacted plan.
Awesome. So now looking at how do we collect the data and how do we make sure that we've hit all of the steps of the timeline? So when we're looking at how to collect data or how to take the data, which again, like Stacey said, we do have a video to show you that a little bit better, but it's really looking at what are our main objectives and looking at our kind of a little summary cheat sheet here with our bullets that are how to collect the data to kind of make sure that we really have those key components in there. So the first thing is you do have to remember, like that's one thing about PBSP implementation data. It is so individualized, per child, per plan, which makes it really difficult to just do a blanket type of data collection. Um, it has to be really specific to what the needs are of the student based on their interventions, and also what are the needs of the staff and how many staff are collecting data and how many do we need to train and what are all these components in there. It really makes a big difference, especially when it depends on the grade that the student are in. Like if they're in elementary, a lot of times it's one teacher taking the data, but also looking at we have one teacher maybe with a classroom of 20 kids collecting this data, or maybe it's a para taking the data. Or for in secondary, again, do we have 6 or 7 teachers taking the data? So really making sure that it's individualized for that student. So the first step is step one. You've already written the plan, but now we have to create that form. Stacy and I have helped create a form, an example form that you just were able to fill in with your activity. So there is that component of using that form or creating a form that fits your needs better but also make sure has all those essential components that need to be in there. Um, so the first step is you got to create that form. Take the stuff, the interventions from the PBSP and put it into that form. The next step is really training the form. And I think this is a step that a lot of teams overlook or they do a quick 5 minute, here's the stuff, go over it type of thing, and then say, okay, go take data. Training the form is really important so that the staff understand what pieces they're going to be doing. And as you can see in the timeline on step one, it's really important that all of the training needs that are bulleted there are addressed for all of the staff. This is the part where we also are discussing as a team of, are we taking tallies? Are we taking plus or minuses to look at the student's progress? Are we looking at percentages? Coming together as a team to say, truly, are we taking data all the same? So there's a part of training that form. Again, in step one, do we have our non-negotiables? Do we have where we're taking data on our target behavior, replacement behavior, and goal behavior? We have to make sure that progress monitoring is in there because without that data, we're not going to be able to go anywhere or actually see if it's being effective or not. And a lot of people love to write notes. They love the anecdotal data. They love to tell the stories, which is beautiful. However, we're not able to analyze that. So it's really key importance of not just having when we do our progress monitoring or our PBSP review to say the student's making progress. Well, how are they making progress? What interventions making progress for them? So all those components are part of that. So really making sure those non-negotiables and all those pieces and parts are on that form. And then if we go to step two, are we collecting the right data? Is there something, and that's why that 2 to 3 day check-in is so important, because what if we realize we are missing a key component of data or somebody's not taking data? So what adjustments do we need to make? Or what adjustments do we need to make on an intervention saying, Maybe this one isn't working so far right now. And not really not working is maybe we don't have contextual fit or the resources to make sure that that is happening too. So are we collecting the right data? Just looking at that fidelity. Are we even collecting data? Or is only one teacher collecting data and not the other teachers collecting data? All of those components need to be reviewed at that 2 to 3 day check-in, which is so important. So again, like I said before, we're not getting to that 4 to 6 week and we don't have any data, and that's really frustrating. Um, and then looking at step 3, are we collecting the data we need to make decisions? Is it the data that we can actually analyze and make decisions based off of it so that we can truly look at interventions to say this intervention is changing behavior, this intervention isn't changing behavior, or we don't have enough data to say if it is or not. So that's the beauty of it all, of really saying, can we make decisions with the data that we have, which is the whole important goal and the reason that we are collecting the data. So again, making sure that we are looking at both progress monitoring and fidelity when we're looking at this point. So we are going to move on and show you some videos that were created by Stacy and I in regards of how to collect the data and then how to analyze it. So we're going to break it up into 2 pieces. So the first part is how to take data. So before you watch this video, if you want to get a piece of paper or sticky note and kind of think to yourself and jot down some things that you notice, I really want you to kind of focus in and look at the transfer of the information from the PBSP to the data form. Kind of see, how does that look? Does it match what you did in your activity? So really looking at how that piece got transferred. Also, I want you to notice how it was determined, or the dialogue determined, of using tallies or the positive and negatives for student response, and the definitions of those. Again, that's a huge piece. As a team, you have to decide what those definitions are. So kind of focus in on what those definitions are for this video. And just remember, all of this terminology of what we're talking about, the definitions are on your guidance document for collecting PBSP data. Really focus in also when you're looking at the 2 types of data and how do they overlap. Just be aware of that. Notice the overlap of the 2, and also notice the importance of having each pieces of those 2. And then lastly, I want you to notice or check in on the example of using the step 2 check-in, the 2 to 3 day. What changes did we make based on that 2 to 3 day check-in? So really focusing on that. So we're going to show the video, and then Stacy's going to help process with you after the video some of the things that hopefully you noticed. All right, so now we are looking at creating what it looks like to create our document for fidelity and progress monitoring. So what we did is from the PBSP that we had, the behavior plan that we had, we took the target behavior and wrote it out right here. So we are very clear that it's observable and measurable of what that target behavior is. We then here took the replacement behavior, what that was, put it there, goal behavior, and the function. So that way we're always thinking function-based when we're looking at this as well. So as you can see here, we're at target behavior 1, and this is the fidelity part. So remember, we talked about what the staff is doing. We really want to make sure we're taking fidelity on the plan and how we are doing that. So what we did is we took the different interventions from the plan and actually just put them right in here. So the first one, that antecedent strategy, we took it right from the plan, escorted during class period to bathroom or locker. We talked about the behavior expectation chart, check-in, making sure that's happening each hour. And then here's we have that prompt or replacement behavior, right? We have to have that as one of the essential elements of our PBSP. And here we actually put the script in. The reason why we actually have that example script there is so that all staff that are looking at it, this is a nice reminder for them to make sure that we're all using the same common language and we know exactly what we're saying here. And as it goes through, same thing, our teaching strategies are here. Replacement behavior, our reinforcement for goal behavior and replacement behavior, our redirect minimize strategies. Again, you see the example script. Minimizing the payoff, what is that intervention? and then so forth. Down here is we have our progress monitoring. So this is what the student is doing. And same thing we looked at here, we put our target behavior definition here, replacement behavior and goal behavior, so that everyone's on the same page and can really understand and make sure we're all monitoring the same thing. So let's dig into how we collect this data. So there's different ways of looking at this. So we have tallying the number of times per day it's happening, but a real big piece of fidelity is we want to know what the student response was. So did this intervention help the behavior? Did it change behavior, or did it not? So we want to really look at that. And then here is our guidance in regards to fidelity. We're going to look at using that more once we make sure we've gotten this in place, or for some of our teaching strategies. We'll talk more about that, what that looks like. So here, we're looking at it first, making sure that as a team, when we first start looking at this, what does that positive and negative mean, those plus and minuses? They can mean multiple different things. So it can mean, yep, the student did engaged in that intervention, or they didn't engage in that intervention. Or that plus and minus could be it stopped the behavior, and so that was a good thing, or it didn't stop behavior. So as a team, you guys need to figure out exactly what those pluses and minuses mean, but those are also your tallies. Have you noticed we didn't have to do both? So this is our tallies. We can still count that for when we do go and analyze that data. So let's start with our antecedents. When we're looking at this, we're saying, okay, escorted during class period to bathroom or locker. So we're looking at, so when he did ask to go to the bathroom or needed to get something out of his locker, was he escorted during that time? So if we look here, it's saying, yep, he was escorted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times for the Monday. 2 times, we're going to say that that meant that he did do it all of the times, but let's say that the negative or the minus is going to mean that he might have engaged in it, but it was still yelling, and he was still, it didn't change the behavior or help the behavior. You're still engaging in that target behavior. But 2 of the times, he did well. It worked out well for him, and he had a good response to that. Again, now looking at here, behavior expectations chart check-in with teacher prior to each hour. Since the student is a middle schooler, we're going to have 6 different hours that we have 6 different hours and 6 different teachers that they should be checking in. So what we should be seeing for fidelity-wise, we should be seeing at least 6 times. Right here, we're saying we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. So that makes me think that maybe one teacher didn't do it that day. 3 of the times, positive outcomes, right? And 2 of the times means that the student had a negative response to that behavior chart check-in when we're looking at that. When we are looking at the replacement behavior now. So we're going to tally here. How many times did we prompt to the replacement behavior? Remember, when we're talking about antecedent strategies and prompting to the replacement behavior, this is before a target behavior ever occurs. We're saying the student is at his baseline, and we are making sure to remind them before each hour that if he needs to take a break, he can. We have our example script. So remember, if you feel like you need to take a break, just let me know. We want to make sure that at the beginning of each hour, especially in the beginning when we first implement a plan, we want him to really hear us say these things and know that that is an option. So what's saying here is before behavior occurs, we have 5 of the teaching staff for each of the hour completed that. That shows fidelity that they did remind him that he has the option to take a break if he needs one throughout the class hour. So again, we have some correlation here that maybe there's one teacher that's not totally following through with that plan. But let's keep moving on and seeing what we have right here. We do want to say that we have our teaching strategies here. Now, teaching strategies are things because we have to make sure we're teaching the student the actual interventions, how to take that break. And then we look at here, boundaries around social interactions and peer adults. So when we look at this here, we really want some of these teaching strategies to go along with the student's IEP goals, right? They should be working on the same type of interventions in regards to coping skills or self-monitoring, or in this case, some social interactions. So this might not be something that happens every day, but this might be something that happens when they're working with the social worker in their time, or maybe this could be with their special education teacher, or if it is a gen ed student, maybe it's their homeroom teacher is kind of working through that. So when we look at this here, we're going to kind of look at this scale. So one is a somewhat, 50 to 79%, we implemented this strategy. So maybe we did it once, maybe we did it once in the entire week. So we're kind of looking through that as well. Here, how to ask for and take a break. Again, this might not be something that is done in every hour, but was it taught through a certain staff member, making sure that they're really role playing and modeling that for the student. So we're saying, yeah, we definitely taught the student that. Again, this could look different if a student is in elementary school. This might be something that you've taught them and it's actually on their schedule for the day to teach it every single day. Have you written a social story about it? So there's multiple different ways to making sure that you're teaching how to take that break and modeling it for them and having them role play, really understanding what that feels like. And again, we're teaching them when they're at baseline. So as we're looking through this, we're going to keep moving forward and kind of going through our sections here. We are next on reinforcement strategies. So again, these are things that we do after we've seen the student engage in the replacement behavior or goal behavior. And then we want to note the student response, right? Because the whole goal of this fidelity data is to see, are our interventions working? Are they changing behavior? So here, replacement behavior immediately gets to take a break when he asks for one. So we're going to reinforce that no matter what is going on with the student at that time, if they're engaging in the behavior or not engaging in the behavior, if they say, I need to take a break, we immediately give that to him. So again, let's count that up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 times this student requested a break, we immediately gave it to him. But one time, it didn't change the behavior. So we have 5 times here, it definitely changed the behavior, or they came back from the break and the behavior was great. Maybe we had one time where they went for the break, but it did not end the target behavior and behavior continued to increase. So we are showing here that they asked for the behavior, we're going to go ahead and give it to them. Now, once we come down here and say, oh, so this is our reinforcement for taking a break. Tickets for appropriately taking a break. Since we had 5 appropriate breaks, we should have 5 appropriate tickets. So we need to make sure these correlate, that every time there was a positive outcome for requesting that break, they're getting that 5 tickets for each one of those breaks to show that they took the break helped, and they came back after the break and engaged back in class. So that's a great thing, making sure those correlate. And we're just tallying those for each time that we gave those. Again, the fidelity part of this is to help staff monitor if the student is doing what they need to be doing, are we reinforcing that? And so it's really that checks and balances and checking in on that as well. But we did notice one of them was, no, the behavior was still heightened. So looking at that. Goal behavior. So for this student has what we determined in the behavior plan is that their goal is to reach 60% of their daily points. And if they do, they get to have a print off at the end of the day. So we want to look at and say, did they reach their goal behavior? Yes. This is not saying that the student reached 100% of their points, but they reached all 60% of their points. So that's 100% of reaching that 60%. So yes, they met their goal for the day and they got their picture printed off. So again, that's showing fidelity that we are able to reward the student for his goal behavior that day as well. We want to make sure that we're, again, looking at how this redirection and minimize, again, in response to the replacement behavior. As you notice, majority of the data we're taking on is really around this replacement behavior when it comes to fidelity, because it's the staff that are making sure that they teach the replacement behavior, they're prompting to the replacement behavior, they're redirecting to the replacement behavior, and we want to see, is the replacement behavior changing the behavior, or is it making it worse? We want to really see that response. So here we are here. Redirect to the replacement behavior. So that redirect means we have started already seeing some of the behavior. This could be more agitation. We might see the student knowing that, and this is why it's so important to understand and know your students as well, is we might start seeing some of those signs. We really need to tune into the kids and kind of see what is those signs that the student's starting to get agitated. And so it's not, this is more of that low level. But we're starting to see, because he's feeling upset, we're going to make sure that we are redirecting him to that. So once we start seeing some of that little behavior, our example script, it looks like you might need to take a break. Or you need to take a break. It might get to that point where the behavior is starting to become increase in intensity or even duration. And we're going to say, you know what, we're going to direct that. You need to go take a break. So on here, if we look at our data, there was 4 times that we had to redirect the student to take a break. 2 of the times, it did not change behavior. The student continued to show the target behavior, and it did not stop it. 2 of the times, it did stop behavior, and the student was able to take their break and come back, and it helped with that. So if you notice here, then we have minimize the payoff. So if the plan was run and you continue to see the target behavior, so that means we redirected to the replacement behavior of taking a break, and 2 times it did not change behavior, and the behavior continued to be presented. Then we have the staff will ignore. Since we have 2 here, we better have 2 different times here of interventions. So these 2 need to correlate. So as those 2 times happened, we looked at, oh, so did we ignore the behavior? Well, one time that ignoring the behavior did work. So the student response was positive. So that stopped the behavior from happening or escalating anymore. So the target behavior was changed. Here, we did that and it did not change the behavior. So the behavior was continuing to happen. Since we had that one time and a behavior continued to happen, we then had to get to our next response. And our next response was, if target behavior continues, office called, he's brought down to the office to a space where he is ignored. So we had one time that had to happen. So that kind of gets to our end of our chain of events when it comes to look at target behavior. So all of these things need to correlate. Otherwise, we didn't do it all the way. So if we had one negative here, but didn't send this, that means we did not follow the interventions on that plan. So we really want to make sure, again, fidelity-wise, are we doing what we're going to say we're going to do? And then at that point, if the behavior escalates more, here's where you would follow your emergency intervention plan if that student has one. This student doesn't have one, so we don't really need to look at that right now. So then we're getting to our progress monitoring. What is the student doing? So tally of the times it happened, tally of the student's response, positive or negative, and tally of the times it happened. So when I turn this over, you're going to kind of see we're looking at our target behavior. So here's the tallies. We need to know, and these are non-negotiables that we talked about that have to happen so that we can monitor the student behavior. The goal is that the target behavior decreases, replacement behavior increases, and eventually the goal behavior definitely increases. So for here, we're looking at, we had 5 times the target behavior happened. And all we have to do is tally that. And we're only tallying when we see this definition of the target behavior still. So this happened 5 times. When we look at replacement behavior, request to take a break with attention, we got to figure out, how did we get this data? So staff prompted or directed break. So let's go back and look at where we had our redirect, right? So we have our redirect. Look, it happened 4 times. So I'm going to take this number and bring it back down to here, and that's how I got my 4. But I also want to know, remember, I want to know if it was positive or negative. So if I'm looking at this, I'm saying, oh, when I look at that, 2 times it was positive, a positive outcome. So 2 out of the 4 times staff prompted or redirected to a break, it was positive. Now I want to look at student requested break independently, because obviously that's the goal that we want them to. We want them to independently use their replacement behavior and help build those skills. So we want to look at, how did we get this information? Well, remember when we first had our prompting, remember we're reminding them of it, that shows that, oh, we prompted them 5 times. So we're looking at, if we prompt before behavior happens and we're just reminding them, and the student then says, I need to take a break, and they're pretty close to baseline, and you are not seeing a target behavior, because again, this is the antecedent strategy, it's before, and the student says, I'd like to take a break, that shows that would be an independent request. So they requested it independently. Also here, if you look at here, when he asks for one, he gets one. So this is where we're getting that data. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times they requested that. So here's my 6 here. And when I look here, oh, it was positive 5 times. So 5 out of the 6 showed that the student requested break was positive. And that's going to help me look at, these are my progress monitoring. How is that student doing? What are we seeing in regards to target behavior, goal behavior, and replacement behavior, both staff prompted and student initiated. So as I'm looking through, we're going to see how all of these pieces and parts come in. And again, the more interventions you have in the behavior plan, the more interventions you're probably going to have in here, and kind of seeing what do we need to be looking at. When we think about that 2 to 3 day check-in after we started taking data that we had in our timeline, we're checking in with the team, we're looking at, are we taking the right data, or how's the fidelity going, are there any barriers? And so when I notice something, when I look at this is something I would check in, and is saying, okay, behavior expectation chart check-in with teacher prior to each hour. Well, I know there's 6 hours, but I'm consistently seeing this 5 times, and same here, this prompt 5 times. So it shows me that maybe there's one teacher that's not doing it, and I can kind of figure out why. So once I realize that there is a teacher not doing it, and it's the band teacher, so then I'm going to ask, what's going on? And the band teacher then eventually says, you know what, I'm not seeing any of the behaviors in my class. We look at the behavior referral data, the ADC data, and notice that band class is something that the student actually enjoys pretty much. He hasn't had any issues. So therefore, you know what? We really don't need to put in all of these strategies in band, because he's actually doing really well in band. So then we can see, okay, so maybe this doesn't have to happen every hour. This is out of the 5 hours. So looking at that, we can make those changes after that 2 to 3 day check-in, and no longer need that staff member for the band teacher to be able to have to do that as well. And that's why we do those check-ins, so we can make some of those adjustments and changes to best meet the student's need. So as we're done, we're gonna have one of these per day. You might even, if it's a middle school or a high school and secondary, you might have a teacher fill it out per hour as well, whatever that looks at. So we have it per day, we're going to turn them in at the end of the week, and then we're going to be able to get into how to analyze that. And once we look at analyzing that, we're able to help make our decisions and put that information into our PBSP. So now that we have what the data is, putting it on our sheet, and being able to look at how we collect it, and it's just tallies. As you notice on here, there's not any spots for really narrative. We're not able to analyze narrative. If there's something that you need to put on there that you think is really important, there is a section here for notes if we want to notice something that maybe the student didn't have their medication that day, or there's something going on that you wanted to put in place more specifically. I think those are on there, but it's really making sure that we're looking at what is the response of the student to the intervention. Are we as staff doing what our plan says, and is it helping change the behavior? Again, this is one example of what this form could look like, and putting that on there, but we do have our non-negotiables. It can be something that you create a form, but making sure you have all of these pieces and parts on there. And it could be even an electronic form if that's something that is easier for you as well, but making sure, again, that all your pieces and parts are there.
So take a breath. That was a lot. Like we said from the very get-go, this can appear overwhelming, especially if you have 5 of these sheets that you're trying to keep track of, maybe as a general education teacher, or maybe you're the one who's in charge of kind of monitoring how these things are going. yes, it can be a lot. That's why it is a team process, and we need to rely on each other. But we also recognize that there are other things going on other than this specific student's PBSP data collection. Again, we are showing you best practice, and it's up to you guys as a team as to how you might need to modify that based on skill capacity, just based on time capacity. And as you build, hopefully with always having the goal of building up to having very complete data collection to know that you're making the best decisions using that data. So hopefully that was a good example of kind of what you should be looking for. And I think just to recap, a couple of the things that really struck me in there is I think, well, first of all, I always hear like, well, there's like replacement behavior is referred to like 4 times. And it is like you have to prompt to it, you have to teach it, you have to reinforce it, you have to redirect to it, you have to track that as progress monitoring. So if you just have like replacement behavior in a column on a data sheet, that's not going to give you the information that you want. That's why it's frustrating when you go to look at that data because you can't make any decisions on it. You have to separate it out to know where and when these occurrences are happening to be able to figure out when you're having the most impact. So I just had to mention that replacement behavior piece because that comes up a lot. That yes, it's mentioned a lot because your whole plan is built around that replacement behavior. Because remember, it's competing with that target behavior we don't want to see anymore. And again, these are all things that we train in the one-day FBA PBSP training, which is in person. It is not an online module. I think going back to that PBSP implementation plan timeline and how it relates to this actual form and using it, like determining, do we need tallies? Which interventions do we just need to tally? Which interventions do we need to measure the response? And I would say a majority of the time you are going to measure the response of that intervention. So you can see if what you're doing is working even just within that intervention. But then determining what do those pluses and minuses mean? Does a plus mean the behavior stopped? Or does the plus mean the student engaged in the intervention? I mean, those are two very different things. And what is the goal of that intervention? Do we want to see the behavior stop, or do we just want to see the child participate in the intervention? So those pluses and minuses are also the tallies, but you're measuring the response, and you all have to be on the same page as to what that definition is. And really setting those expectations right away. What are our look fors? So if I know that there are 6 teachers, there should be 6 check-ins per day if it says it's happening at the beginning of every class. Like that's a non-negotiable. I know as the person taking the data that I have to do that. Like that means I have to do that every class period. And I also think the super benefit of that check-in, like Steph said, is we realized, in this situation, there was a teacher that wasn't taking the data at all. And we had to dig a little bit deeper. And we found out that there wasn't a need for that teacher to take that data. So we could reset that expectation to where then we were only looking for 5 tallies that day around that check-in. And from the get-go, that helped us not keep having to add up data over time that was really not accurate. It still may have given us good data, but we would want an explanation as to why that particular teacher wasn't taking the data. And we found out right away it was a non-issue, so we could move on. I think it also really helps us taking this fidelity data, making connections early. Instead of, like Steph said, instead of waiting until we're 3 or 4 weeks in and noticing there's a problem, those early check-ins in this process really help you make those connections like, we're offering a ton of breaks to this kid. We're rocking that out, but we're hardly giving him any tickets for it when those two are really related. So just really being able to make those earlier connections and really take advantage of that check-in. That 2 to 3 day check-in really is looking more at contextual fit, fidelity. Do we need to make changes around the data collection? Not necessarily interventions at that point. We can't make determinations that early, but it can get us on the right track for that data collection. So now that you have taken that behavior plan, you've created your tool, you've trained the tool, you've taken the data, now we need to analyze it. The good news is if you've taken the data the right way and kind of followed this implementation plan timeline and made adjustments to your data, you should have really great analyze data to bring to that PBSP review. We never want to sit down, especially at the first review, and analyze the data because that's a hot mess. It's kind of not a good use of time. So the goal is to have that data analyzed before you get to that meeting. So now we want to show you what it would be like to analyze a week's worth of data and how we go through that process. Like I said, it's pretty much doing the math. And some of you are fancy with your graphs and things like that. Steph and I are pretty paper and pencil because it really does still give you what you need. Yes, graphing it over time is amazing, and we can do that. But sometimes pie charts don't give you the breakdown of what you need. It will give you certain percentages, but it doesn't allow you to make the connections within the data that comes with paper and pencil. So sorry to all the school psychs out there, but we are going to show you how to analyze this data paper and pencil, but you can fancy it up however you'd like. I guess what I'd like you to look for in there is how do you see us utilizing the data? How do you see what you just learned from Steph in that video, how to take it, how that impacts and makes analyzing easier? And really notice, and Steph said this too when she, in her video, notice the connection between when you analyze, like the fidelity of a strategy and the student response, and why that's so important that we analyze that data and use it to make decisions. So I think this is about what, 15 minutes, I think. So we'll see you in 15. Okay, so now that you've done all of that hard work of taking all of this data every single day, we need to analyze it in a way that helps us make decisions at our behavior plan reviews. So this is one example. Stephanie just showed you in the previous video. We're going to have one of these sheets per day, and maybe if you're secondary, you may have 6 of these sheets per day. So the recommendation is that you at least add these up and analyze weekly so that, especially at the secondary level, you aren't having 30 sheets of paper to try and analyze 5 minutes before a meeting. So we know how that goes. So here is your raw data, and what you want to do, this is just one day. So I'm going to take all 5 days from that week, or however many days that student was there that week. And obviously if we're missing a day, we want to say why. Was it because the student was absent, or was it because the person who typically helps take the data wasn't there? Those are all important things that we want to know when we go to analyze. So we want to break this down, and we already know how we took the data. So now let's add it all up. So for this first strategy where we talk about the student response, what we want to do is just add up whether they were pluses or minuses. You add them all up to get a grand total. So the grand total for that week was we escorted 20 times. And then you can count up all the pluses or you can count up all the minuses and subtract. But either way, 16 of those 20 times we had a positive response for that particular week. So that's all we need for that one, because there's not a set number of times that the student should be escorted unless we specifically say the child must be escorted to their locker every class period. That's not what this says. That just says if they need it, they get the escort. So there isn't a minimum. Now, as we discussed previously, this behavior expectation chart check-in with the teacher prior to each hour, that is a set number. Originally, we said that should happen 6 times a day. So you multiply that by 5 days, that's 30 times per week. But because we did that amazing check-in after a couple days of data collection, the team realized that this plan really didn't need to be, and legitimately, genuinely, did not need to be implemented during band. It's not that the band teacher was just letting the child engage in these behaviors and not take data on it. The behavior really hasn't been happening in band. So we reset that non-negotiable number to only include 5 class periods. So 5 class periods times 5 days in a week times 5 class periods versus 6 is 25. So this number here isn't going to change per week. This is a set number. We should have this happening 25 times per week. So we did pretty good this week. It was 23 out of 25 times. So yeah, that's being done with fidelity. Now, out of those 23 times, we want to see how many times did that work, or how many times was there a positive response. You know, when we sat down, the student was engaged and responsive and went over that with us. 18 out of those 23 times. So again, I just counted up, either count up the positives or count up the negatives and subtract it from 23. So 18 out of those 23 times. So it's looking pretty good for that first week. We're doing a really nice job with fidelity, and things are going okay. Then we want to go to prompting to the replacement behavior. Again, there really isn't an exact set number. I would say these first couple of weeks, every teacher should probably be prompting to this replacement behavior just to get that student used to that language and what it might look like in that particular teacher's classroom if you're looking at a secondary level. So you can have that number of 25 in the back of your mind, but it doesn't have to be that. So we're at 22, so we're sitting pretty good. That happened 22 times, just that initial prompt before any behaviors were seen. Then we're gonna take all of the numbers that we put in place and average them together. So for those 5 days, it averaged out to be a 2. So yep, we are really working hard on teaching that child on how to ask for a break, which correlates to presenting the expectation chart and prompting to that particular behavior. The boundaries around social interactions with peers and adults, that might be more work from non-classroom staff, like Steph mentioned, more what you might see in an IEP. So we're taking our time with that one. So yeah, we're working on that one, but we're not quite there yet. So that one averaged out to be a 1. So we're getting there. All right, so then we're gonna look at the replacement behavior. And remember, it looks like all of these pluses and minuses per day. So I want to count up all of them, whether they're pluses or minuses. So I came up with 26. So that child asked for a break 26 times. Now again, I'm going to count up all the pluses. So out of those 26 times, 22 of them were very successful. So that's pretty good. 22 out of the 26 times. 26 is a great number. He's taking a significant amount of breaks. 22 of those times they were successful and we had a positive response. Now these two numbers should correlate, because if we're saying that child gets a ticket for appropriately taking a break, and he took a break appropriately 22 times, so we gave tickets 20 times. 2 times we forgot, or maybe something else was going on. That's still pretty good for fidelity. Only missing 2 an entire week, I say that's a celebration. So really talk this up to staff too when you're seeing these kinds of numbers. And if you're not, really get into the barriers and why some things might not be happening. It doesn't mean it's any one particular fault. Again, lots of things happen environmentally to impact the ability to take data, and we just have to be frank when we talk about it. And then when we get to the goal behavior, we want to know how many days did that child, so how many yeses did we have? How many of those days did they reach 60% of their daily points? So that is our baseline for this child right now, is 60%. So 4 out of those 5 days. Steph originally mentioned that that first couple days, they were saying, if this said the percentage was 100%, so over here it says 100%, she said that that meant that child met 60% of their daily points. We decided as a team that's too confusing, and we really want to know the actual percentage of points that child got for the day so that we can have an average to be able to say, wow, the average for the week was 84%. Maybe we can up the ante and say, okay, now he has to reach 70% of his daily points. So we really want to use the actual percentage of points that child got. So we know if we say, yes, it was above 60%, but we want to know exactly what the percentage was of those points per day, because we can kind of manipulate that data into resetting that baseline if we need to. So then we go to the redirect. Again, you've got those pluses and minuses. You're going to take and add them all up. And then you're going to say, okay, how many times did that redirect work to either, to reduce that behavior or extinguish the behavior in the moment? We're only at about 50%. We're getting there. But that's a really good number to start with to see, okay, this is week 1. The goal is to not have to get to the redirect, so we'll keep working on the antecedent strategy end of things. So if I say 12 out of the 25 times it worked, so then I'm going to expect that there's going to be some numbers down here. So if I subtract that from 25, and this is how you really can do a check on your data. So that means 13 out of 25 times it didn't go well. So that should be the number down here when I count of how many times we went to this minimized payoff. We went to the ignoring. Again, there's pluses and minuses there, but all those pluses and minuses should add up to this 13 because that's 25 minus 12 is 13. So that's how I know how many times it didn't work. So out of that 13 times we had to go to ignoring, 8 of them worked. So the ignoring worked, the behavior stopped. So again, if 8 out of 13 worked, that means 5 times it didn't work. So I should, that number down here, when I count these tallies under office called, should equal 5. So that's how you could do the check on yourself, just like we did for the tickets. It's the same thing. We're checking here. Do all of these numbers agree? Because if they don't, something's wrong in our data, and that's okay. We just have to look through it to see maybe where we made the mistake in actually taking the data, or was it a mistake in actually analyzing the data? And mistakes happen frequently, so that's why you do those checks. Now we're going to move on to the progress monitoring, which some of it's already kind of been done for you. You just have to add it up. So I'm just going to take all these tallies for target behavior. I'm going to add it up. I had 26 incidents of target behavior over the week. Then I'm going to manipulate these a little bit. So I want to know just this number of it in and of itself. I'm going to look at that and I'm going to transfer it over here. So over the week, I want to add up the total number of staff directed prompts or redirects, I should say, to the replacement behavior. So total was 25. Then I want to count up how many were successful. 12 out of 25. Well, we're looking at about 50%. I want to do the same thing for requests independently. So I'm just adding these numbers up. This bottom number is the number of times it actually happened. So 26 times over the week. Then how many times was it successful? 22. That's looking really, really good. Now I can say overall, if I add these two numbers together, okay, that gives me 34. So 34 out of 51 times that replacement behavior was successful. I mean, we hope that percentage goes up over time, but that's kind of where we're starting. But then we also want to see, is this child able to do these things independently versus us having to do it? And maybe here, I mean, look, it's way more successful when that child has asked for that break himself versus us. So is it an issue of how we're saying it, when we're saying it? You know, if it's, hey, bud, you know what, you need to take a break right now versus you need to leave my classroom and take a break right now, that might be part of the issue. So really talking about why that might be happening is a good talking point. Lastly, we're just going to tally those goal behaviors. Would we like to see that increase? Absolutely. Right now, we're really focused on the replacement behavior, but let's keep track of these goal behaviors because really, we would hope if target behaviors go down, replacement behaviors go up, then we might see goal behavior go up as well. So just that's kind of how you can, I mean, it's really a matter of math, but it's also a matter of taking what you have to be able to make some decisions around that data. And that's what we're going to be talking about next is really now that we have taken the data, we've analyzed the data. Now, what are we going to do to make decisions around that data? And then where the heck do we put all this stuff in our actual behavior plan? So stay tuned. Okay, so now that you've done all of that hard work, so again, it might seem overwhelming, but hopefully by the time you get to the data analyzation part, you can start to see where we make those connections. I want to kind of work, I don't want to say backwards a little bit, but I want to start with some noticings. And I think I assume, we all do, we assume fidelity, right? We assume that we have the best of intention. So when I was explaining how to analyze the data around the redirect minimize, there's a really nice response continuum that we like to see as behaviors get a little bit more intense in these behavior plans in that section. Again, that's a training piece that we trained in the one day, but you know, I made the assumption, I said, well, you know, that child was redirected 12 out of 25 times, which means when we move to the next continuum of the planned ignoring, then we should have done that 13 times. Now, I'm assuming if those numbers don't add up to 13, there's a fidelity issue somewhere. It may not be that it wasn't done with fidelity, but those numbers might not exactly match up. And if they don't, I want to know why. And if there's a big gap in those numbers, you know, I want to know why. Maybe it's that we're skipping the planned ignoring and we're jumping right to the office, which is not part of the plan, but oftentimes is what happens. So, that's where we want to look. Are we utilizing that response continuum the way we said we would? And when I explained that in there, I assumed that we were doing that in the exact order of that continuum. And maybe there's another step we're missing in there that we need as an intermediary step. Who knows? But being able to manipulate and use that data, even just around that response continuum. So I think that's where, when we analyze the data, I think people get confused. Yes, we are looking for an overall reduction in the target behavior, and we're hoping to see an increase in the goal and replacement behavior. What we also want to look at, and I think this is what gets lost in our data collection, which is why we have the form the way we have it, and gets lost in the analysis. We have great data, but we have to be able to make connections in the data. So I not only want to know, are the target behaviors decreasing, but I also want to know, are all of these individual interventions we are implementing with fidelity, are they having an impact? Because I want to know that if I say I'm going to check in with this child every day and that check-in is successful, that's probably contributing to a reduction in behavior. But if it's not, if I'm still seeing a reduction in behavior and that intervention isn't going so well, I probably don't need to do that intervention anymore or talk about why it's not going well. And we'll get to that in making those data-driven decisions, but it's not only the overall data in the progress monitoring, but it's also within that fidelity data. Are we seeing success in these interventions that we're spending a lot of time on implementing? So I just really wanted to make that connection, and hopefully you did as we were going through there. Um, I think that might be, oh, the other thing that I wanted to draw attention to are kind of the changes that were made to the data collection, kind of from the fidelity check at that maybe 2 to 3 week or the 2 to 3 day check-in. But when you get to that 2 to 3 week preview, kind of that step 3 before you get to a plan review, is taking some of that data and analyzing it. So, I mean, we caught that the band teacher didn't need to take the data. So we adjusted that bottom line, because when you go to analyze this data, you have to first look through your interventions and determine which of these have set numbers and which of them don't. Because sometimes it's out of a certain number that we're looking for. Others, we're just looking for overall trends to see where we're at with those numbers and does it have an impact on the overall behavior. So we did make some adjustments. The one I really want to point out, the teacher was an early adjustment. That was within the first couple of days. But, as we kind of looked at when we were looking at that goal behavior and that point sheet and thinking, well, yeah, I mean, the student's making 60% of their points, but we really kind of want to know, we want to change the way we analyze it and the way we take it and look at the exact number of points. We have that. I mean, if I'm sure we have the point sheet where we're saying, oh yeah, they made 80%, 85% of their points. So we know that's at least 60. So that's a yes. We just want to analyze it differently. We probably had the data because that will lead us to actually making some approximations toward more success for that student. If we can say, hey, he's rocking it out, so let's increase how many points that child needs to get to reach that reinforcement, that means we're seeing more positive behaviors and we're working more toward that goal behavior. So those approximations are things that we also train in the one-day FBA PBSP training, very distinctly how we change how we're measuring things to see if we notice a behavior change on that approximation with actually less support. I think hopefully that video, both videos, have helped you get into how we might then use the data. I mean, it isn't just taking the data and sitting down after 4 weeks and looking at it. I hope what we've taught you is from the very initial stages of data collection to look at not only your fidelity and making those connections, but also gosh, does that make sense if this number is this and this number is this? I don't really feel like that's making sense right now. I don't think that I don't think I can analyze that and make sense of it. So really recognizing kind of those errors and patterns and what changes you might need to make really early on in the process. So you don't, if you get buy-in for people taking this data and you sit down and say we can't use it to make any decisions, like good luck with anybody taking any data after that. So I know it's a lot of front loading, but it will pay off in the end. So we've taken this data. Now, what do we do with it? How do we make decisions around the data? And there is a guidance document. Apparently, I just want to be heard in my video. So there is a guidance document around this in these three questions. It's called PBSP database decision making. Do we need to pull it up? I don't think we probably need to pull it up unless you want to. We're recording this late on a Friday afternoon. All right. So here's what it looks like. And yes, there's lots of bullet points, but there's three basic questions. So we will show you where to put this in your actual behavior plan, because that's also questions that we get. Now that you've analyzed the data and you can look at fidelity, you can look at what interventions are and aren't going well. You can look at your target behavior and where you're at with things based on your baseline data from your functional behavior assessment. That's why ABC data is critical as a baseline. So now we can compare where we were when we started with the functional behavior assessment and then where we are now as far as the target behavior. So when we talk about database decision making, there's three questions we want to ask ourselves. And every single question, you also need to look at fidelity. So is the behavior getting better? Awesome. If it's getting better and we've implemented with fidelity, we could just keep writing it out and see what happens. The more success we get, the more we could start fading certain and manipulate certain parts of the plan to see if we can decrease some of the intensity of these interventions. We could set the criteria for reaching certain reinforcement higher. There's lots of things we can manipulate based on that student and the capacity of the team. Now, if the behavior is getting better, okay, you're seeing a decrease in the target behavior, but your team is like, yeah, but we're not really implementing everything like we should be. You really need to look for, if you're like, hey, the behavior is getting better and we've never utilized this intervention, we've never utilized the check-in, get rid of it. You don't need it anymore. Really, don't just have interventions in there to make it look good, because that just weighs everything down. It's more data that you have to take. But also consider other reasons as to why that behavior might have improved, even with a lack of fidelity with the implementation. I mean, what is one of the big things? Medication changes, environmental changes, sometimes it's staff changes. So all of those things need to be considered before you make changes to the interventions. Now let's go to, we're doing all this work and the behavior is getting worse. If the behavior is getting worse and you have determined that you have not implemented with fidelity, do not make any changes to the interventions. You need to go back and review the interventions. What barriers are there to implementation? Maybe there were staff changes. Maybe the room isn't available. Maybe the student was absent for 5 days of the 7 days you were looking at this. There's lots of things that can come into play. Sometimes it's well, nobody really taught me how to do that. I don't know what you're asking me to do. So it's a retrain or coaching of staff around some of these interventions. And frankly, if the behavior is getting worse and you're not implementing with fidelity, you need to check in more regularly as a team until that fidelity increases and people feel more comfortable with the plan implementation. Obviously, if the behavior is getting worse, but you've implemented with fidelity, double check your fidelity. Is it an extinction burst? A lot of times at that first plan review at 4 to 6 weeks, we might be seeing an extinction burst. So that just means sometimes it gets worse before it gets better when we're really implementing some structured interventions. And really don't make changes to a plan every time a student has a bad day. Doesn't mean the plan's not working. It just means that student had a bad day, or maybe staff had a bad day. And the last thing, the behavior really hasn't showed any progress. The answer to that is hasn't gotten any better, hasn't gotten any worse. Check fidelity. Really dig deep into are we really doing what we said we were going to do? And has anything else changed? You could keep the plan as is and just kind of wait to see over time, or you could start pushing things a little bit more, and you'll either see probably an increase in the behavior or hopefully a decrease. Maybe you just need to really flip-flop some of the interventions. So that's a really condensed version of some of these conversations that you need to have, but use your data. Say, hey, overall our fidelity is good, but with a couple of these interventions, we did really well. Like if that behavior chart check-in, our data showed that the staff did it 23 out of 25 opportunities. This is why it's important to know the student response, because I might say, yeah, we're implementing that with fidelity. Well, what if the student only responded positively 5 of those 23 times? Hey, I'm doing it, but it's not working. That's why I want to know, oh, I'm going to keep that intervention because it worked 18 of the 23 times. So you have to go through that for each intervention as well, not just the overall progress monitoring data. So yes, it's a lot of conversation, but there's a nice structure that Steph described as to how you go through the data in your plan review. So the PBSP implementation plan encompasses all of these other guidance documents. The main thing you want to follow is that implementation plan and bringing all of the other documents into that. So now, where do we find a place to put this data? We're going to show you a screenshot. And again, when Steph described talking about strengths, weaknesses, or concerns, I should say, concerns, and entering in the physical percentages of these data, it goes in the section entitled here under progress notes. You can bullet, you can underline different sections. You just want to make sure what you're saying anecdotally that you have the data to support it. So yeah, there are quite a few things that are going to be listed in that section. Now, the question that goes to, was the plan implemented as written? There's your fidelity question. If you answer that question, there's a drop down. If you answer that question with a yes, the only box that will appear is that top box in the column next to it where it says implementation follow-up. If you say, yep, we have implemented as written, it's going to ask you for that fidelity data. Now, some people will put fidelity data in the bigger box under progress notes and just say, see progress notes, because if you try to type your fidelity data into that really tiny box in that right-hand column, that column gets really, really long and it's hard to read. It is okay to say, see progress notes. You may get to a point someday where everything's at 80% and you just might say, yes, we are at 80% fidelity for all of our interventions. If on that drop-down menu where it says was the plan implemented as written, if you say somewhat, which is a choice, both of these boxes will appear, which is awesome because you have data to support what's going well, and then you might explain those barriers to implementation. Again, changes in staff, student wasn't there, room wasn't available, any number of things. That's where you want to explain some of those barriers that you've talked about and how you're addressing those barriers. Now, if you say this plan was not implemented as written, if you say no, only that bottom box is going to appear. Please explain barriers to implementation. And you should probably have an action plan around how you're going to get around those barriers. Because if we're saying we're not implementing this plan and we're not working on the barriers around that plan, do we really need the plan? So, that's to the point in your review where you want to list all of those things because we know there's barriers and don't pretend that there aren't because they usually will creep in there. Even plans that are implemented with pretty good fidelity, they have barriers pop up every once in a while that need to be responded to. So in a nutshell, that is how you make decisions based on that beautiful data you've taken and analyzed and brought to your meeting and have a very distinct process to follow in that review meeting. It eliminates a lot of the storytelling. We know the data tells the story. We don't need to capture everything that child has done in the last 4 to 6 weeks. Or a lot of the other we see a lot of programming I don't even know how to say that. We see almost everything that happens with that child all day, every day, sometimes put in the PBSP review section. And it really needs to relate to the behavior plan, not everything going on outside of that. Yes, some of that impacts that child, obviously, but just be careful how much extra information you're adding to those reviews, especially anecdotal. We like to see numbers in there. I think, unless Steph has anything to add to that, those pieces, I think we're going to wrap it up.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Stacy. So thank you for being part of this and watching this with us. We have put a lot of time and energy into creating these documents and figuring out ways to best bring this information to you guys. And we really hope this is helpful. Um, a couple things we want you to make sure you walk away with is remembering to do PBSP reviews every 4 to 6 weeks. So that was just for one, but every 4 to 6 weeks, you're going to have the PBSP review, you're going to have your data analyzed, and you're going to put your information into the PBSP just the same way. Um, Also remembering that this is not a standalone training, this is supplemental. And we really want to make sure this is a great tool for you to use, especially if you're just first time writing a PBSP and doing the data, or you've been doing it for years and you need a better way of instructing and understanding it, or a refresher. But if you do need more information, or a lot of this information seems a little unsure, please come to our full day FBA PBSP training. We do one every fall, and we are willing to do one in the spring if there's enough need for that too. So just think about that. It will be a good way to help understand all of these components and what we're talking about, and understanding the pieces and parts of a PBSP to know what you're actually taking data on as well. We also have an ABC data collection module that you can watch if you need a little more guidance on, or a refresher on how to collect the ABC data as well. So again, thank you for listening to us, and hopefully this has been a tool for you that will help you collect and analyze PBSP implementation data more effectively and efficiently.
Thank you, guys.